Ciara Brian Fanion found guilty of murder in the first degree this morning, awarded the maximum mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And sentenced this defendant to imprisonment for the remainder of his natural life.
Her faith was important to her because she lived by her faith. She was the salt of the earth, genuine and loving. I found out that Amy had passed in a phone call from our mutual friend.
May 8th, 2018. Westfield, Massachusetts. A small town where everybody waves to everybody, where the same families have lived for generations, where nothing ever really happens until just after noon. A 911 call comes through. The voice on the line is calm, too calm. A man identifies himself as Brian Fanion. He says his wife just shot herself. He asks for help. The dispatcher tells him units are on the way. He answers in a flat, steady voice. No panic, no shouting. Just a strange, practiced calm that investigators would never quite be able to shake from their minds. Within minutes, police and fire crews are pulling into the driveway of a quiet home on North Road. Inside, they find 51-year-old Amy Fanion on the dining room floor, a gunshot wound. Her husband kneeling beside her. The room itself tells its own story before anyone says a word. Furniture out of place, a spent casing on the floor, marks on a window frame that don't seem to belong in a simple domestic tragedy. Brian Fanion isn't just any husband. He's a detective with the Westfield Police Department, a man who has spent decades on the other side of scenes exactly like this one. He knows the procedures, he knows the protocols. He's the kind of man who, in any other circumstance, would be the one walking a grieving spouse through what happens next. And that's where things start to feel wrong.
I saw the .45 caliber Smith & Wesson firearm on the stairs that led to the breezeway. There was a police radio, paperwork, mail, and so forth. Chairs pushed about.
And on top of this dining room table, you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich intact on a plate. You had an empty plate that had some blood smear on it.
State Police Detective Brendan Uhl is called in. He looks at the wound. Something about it doesn't sit right with him. He doesn't say anything yet. He just watches. He listens. He waits. To understand why this case shook an entire town, you have to understand who Amy Fanion was.
Amy wrote, "Shadows are created around us whenever something or someone blocks the light. We are created to live in the light. He is calling me out of the darkness. Turn toward the light and the truth."
Amy's outlet was her journaling. She wrote to me about the Bible and having faith. I believe that her faith was important to her because she lived by her faith. She was the salt of the earth, genuine and loving. I found out that Amy had passed in a phone call from our mutual friend.
She was born Amy Hansen, one of 9 children in a big, well-known Westfield family. The Hansen girls were the kind of kids everyone in town grew up knowing. Amy was gentle, generous, the type of person who volunteered at church and never asked for credit. She hiked, she kayaked, she gardened. She found peace outdoors, and people noticed it on her. She met Brian Fanion when she was 16. He was 19. Westfield High School sweethearts. They married in 1985. Brian came from a family of police officers, so joining the force wasn't really a choice for him. It was practically expected. He climbed the ranks, became a respected detective. Everyone in town knew his name. They built a life together. 2 kids, a historic home, 33 years of marriage. The night before she died, Amy was doing something completely ordinary. She was making a handmade gift for a friend's baby shower. She texted her daughter, a normal good night. Nothing unusual, nothing that hinted this would be her last conversation with her child. She had no idea this was her last day alive. Hours after the 911 call, Brian Fanion sits down with investigators. He's composed, methodical. He explains that he and Amy had an argument that morning about retirement about the house, about a dog. He says he set his service weapon down because he needed to use the bathroom. When he came out, he says, Amy was standing there, gun raised to her own head. He says he tried to stop her. He says she was too fast. It's a clean story, a tragic story, the kind of story that on its own might have ended right there. But then, as the interview wraps up, Brian says something that detectives don't forget. He tells them they're going to find things on his phone, and he warns them, it's not what it looks like. That single sentence changes everything, because a phone shouldn't need a warning label, not if there's nothing to hide. Investigators seize his devices, his phone, his laptop, his work computer, and they hand it all over to the Massachusetts State Police Cybercrime Unit. What they find doesn't just raise questions, it builds a timeline that starts weeks before Amy Fanion ever died. Her name keeps surfacing in his search history, a woman. Searches about whether you can have an affair without crossing certain lines. Searches about Massachusetts divorce law. Searches specifically about what happens to a police pension when a marriage ends. And on the very morning Amy dies, while he is still sitting at his desk at the police station, Brian searches something else entirely. The Massachusetts Medical Examiner's office. He leaves work at 11:47 a.m. By lunchtime, his wife is dead. This wasn't a man in shock. This was a man who had been planning, quietly, carefully, for weeks. And the most unsettling part, he thought his decades of experience as a detective would let him get away with it.
After one full day of deliberations, a Hamden Superior Court jury reached its verdict today in the trial of a former Westfield detective charged with killing his wife.
22 News reporter Duncan McLean was inside the courtroom when Brian Fanion learned his fate today. He joins us live from Springfield with today's development.
The wound on Amy Fanion's head told investigators something her husband's story couldn't explain. When a gun is fired at close range against the skin, it leaves behind telltale signs, residue, burns, a very specific pattern that forensic experts know to look for in seconds. Amy's wound didn't have them, not in the way it should have, if she'd done this to herself the way Brian described. That gap between the story and the science was small, but in an investigation like this, small gaps are everything. Detective Uhl brought Brian back in 9 days after Amy's wake. This time, before they even start talking, Uhl reads him his Miranda rights, and the very first thing Brian notices, the very first question out of his mouth, isn't about Amy. It isn't about the investigation. It's about himself. What's changed? Why now? He sticks to his story anyway, insists the gun was right against her head, insists nothing happened the way investigators are starting to suggest. But across town that same afternoon, detectives are sitting down with someone else, a woman named Corrine Norse. Brian had called her just a friend. The thousands of deleted text messages recovered from his phone told a very different story. And then comes the detail that turns this from a tragic accident into something far colder. At 12:47 p.m. on May 8th, while his wife's body was still in their dining room, while paramedics were still in the house, Brian sent Corrine a text message, asking her not to contact him for a while, telling her to pray for his family. His wife had been dead for minutes, and he was already managing the story. Brian Fanion was charged with murder in November of 2019, more than a year and a half after Amy died. The investigation moved slowly because prosecutors wanted it airtight, no shortcuts, no gaps the defense could exploit. Building a case against a career detective meant outthinking someone who had spent decades on the other side of an interrogation table. When he appeared in court to plead not guilty, something happened that stunned everyone in the room. Sitting behind him, in the seats usually reserved for a defendant's supporters, was Amy's own family. Some of them believed him. Some of them thought this was all a terrible mistake. The trial didn't begin until February of 2023, almost 5 years after Amy's death. 5 years of waiting. 5 years of a town divided over a man they thought they knew. One of the first witnesses was Amy's own sister. She testified that weeks after Amy died, Brian told her he'd searched online for something specific, how to make a murder look like a suicide. Prosecutors spent weeks laying out the digital trail, the searches about affairs, the searches about divorce and pensions, the searches about gunshot residue, and finally, the search for the medical examiner's office, made hours before Amy died, right before Brian left work at 11:47 that morning. The defense pushed back, arguing Amy had struggled with anxiety, that her own hair might have blocked residue from reaching her skin. They argued she pulled the trigger herself in a moment of rage. The jury didn't see it that way. On March 22, 2023, after less than 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty of first-degree murder. That same afternoon, Brian Fanion was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The DA called his actions calculating and cruel. The defense maintained, even after the verdict, that the jury got it wrong. But here's what makes this story different from so many others. Brian Fanion wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an outsider. He was the very thing this town trusted most: a detective, a protector, a man who had spent his career standing between ordinary people and danger. He used every bit of that training against the one person who should have been safest around him. Amy Fanion was 51 years old. She had no idea this was her last day alive, and the man she trusted most spent weeks quietly planning to make sure of it. He had every advantage: the badge, the training, the decades of knowing exactly how investigations unfold. None of it was enough. Westfield will never be the same.